Any question regarding to what we have discussed in the first half of today's class? No? So just to confirm, we don't have any student presentation today. Is that right? Hello, everyone?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, so and then next week, so we have 2 presentations, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so please send me your slides by the mid of next week, all right? If it is possible.
By the middle of this week, if we present next week?
Oh, right, yeah. By the middle of this week, yeah. So maybe like Wednesday or Thursday.
Okay. Our group didn't know that, so we were planning on meeting on Thursday. So
And then so just send me by Friday.
Okay.
Okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you so much. Any question regarding to the class material we just discussed? Other things, some students came late, so I want to emphasize, so please submit your homework. Okay, homework 1, homework 2. I didn't see everyone's. Probably like 50 or probably half of the students haven't submitted your homework yet. Just check on Canvas. Make sure you have submitted your homework 1 and homework 2. All right. Okay. So now actually, so I just find out this is the last slide of this chapter. Okay. So to summarize, we look at the value of human capital. So here N stands for, so NPV stands for net present value. So the net present value equal E essentially is the benefit. So the benefit minus cost. I have explained to you how we calculate these through a few examples, right? So the key things here is, so we need to consider both private costs and social costs. So by the way, just back to the previous example, the private cost here, 1,000 is probably it's the tuition you paid out of your pocket. And the 2,000, this is what the government must pay. Just think about in the United States, K-12 is almost free, right? So you pay like a small fee, right? Very small fee. That's probably refers to here. And then so a large chunk of the cost was paid by government through property tax or through other government revenue. That reflects to 2,000. When we calculate the net value of human capital, we must factor in the cost you paid as a private party. Also, you must factor in the cost paid by the government, right? And then, so in terms of the student presentation, I list a few questions for you to discuss. Okay, and then so I was asking you to read those papers. Okay, so those papers are excellent research piece that help us to address the issue I raised. That's an example, the potential problem in estimating the rate of return of education. Another potential question is why nations may underinvest in education. And then in one of the papers I ask you to read to pretend is about what we can do to improve the education outcome in developing countries, more specifically India, right? Through some field experience. So those authors find out there's some very simple approach they can use, but turns out that it can drastically improve the outcome. Right? So there are a few stories. Right? So like in these developing countries, think about India or in general, so those poor countries. Right? So they have low educational attainment. Now, at the same time, they also have poorly run public health system. So these two things, in some sense, they are linked together. Okay? But here, so this public health is probably a little bit more rudimentary, more rudimentary than you might think. What is going to happen in United States? Okay, so the parents, what they were concerning about is some some infectious disease their kids may get, or so the kids may have infectious disease, so that may affect their ability to attend a school, right? And then, so in these developing countries, so what the government urgently needs to do is to encourage parents to get their kids vaccine, number one. And then number two, so they want to send that they need to encourage them to send their children to school, right? But it becomes a non-trivial thing to do, or to encourage them to do the things I just mentioned. So those economies, they have tried many different things. And it turns out, so their cheap way to do that, or maybe a very interesting way to do that, is offer them certain amount of the basic food, right? It turns out, so if they offer them a certain amount of food, and then the parents do have incentive to get their children vaccinated, and also they have incentive to send their kids to school, right? So you may want to dive into those papers to find out what they found through their field experience, right? So I'm going to stop here for this chapter. So right, so yeah, by the way, so those are the papers I ask you to read, like save them here, like in the second paper, worms here. So the second paper, worms identify impact on education and health in presence of a treatment externality, right? So you may find out the interesting story I have loosely explained. So by the way, Michael Kramer, he won Nobel Prize last year for his contribution in understanding development economics, right? And he used a field experience, right? So this is his another paper, Michael Kramer. Okay, so he was trying to understand so what the government can do to create incentive so that teachers to show up more frequently. Apparently, this teacher's absence is going to have dramatic negative impact on the students' educational attainment. Right. So I'm going to stop here for these. All right. So the final thing, format of discussion or your presentation. You need to divide your presentation in 4 big sections. Right? So you need to explain to us what is the questions, right? And why it is important. Right? It's a link to the literature or link to the policy discussion. And then so you need to explain, so what are the possible answers, like how they find out answer, how they address the questions, how they solve the problem. Okay? And then lastly, so you need to explain to us what we learned from this discussion. Okay, what are the implications? What are the policy recommendations? So this is loosely, so give you a guideline how your presentation will be structured. Right? But you feel free to make change. You can expand. Most likely, you can expand based on these 4 categories. Right? So that's for the discussion. Now let's move to next chapter. So I'm going to skip the health because we are going to have 1 or 2 student discussion to talk about that aspect. So instead, I'm going to move to the next chapter, which is going to be capital and saving. Right? So this is going to circle back the things we discussed at the beginning of today's class. So which is the Great Reset. Right? So that is related to government debt. Okay. So hopefully, so this chapter, so give you more answers to the discussion we had at the beginning. Okay, capital and saving. As usual, so I'm going to use simple economic theory to highlight the importance or to motivate this discussion, this chapter. Right. So we have seen this graph several times. Right. So this is essentially a summary of a solo growth model. Right. So you have essentially this is the determination of long run GDP or long run capital stock in solo growth model. Right. So this is going to determine by S times, so Z is a TFP, F of K, that's your fraction function, equal to N plus D times K. Okay, so this is what's going to happen in the long run or in the steady state. Right, so we have one question in your homework too. Right, and then so in previous chapter when we talk about the population, we focus on impact of N. Now we are going to look at saving, right? Okay, and then leave other things fixed, like including Z, including N, including D. So those are fixed. Now we want to understand how S is going to affect your long-run economic growth. And so this graph just show you if S increase, and then the entire curve will move up, right? And then so that's going to cross this solid line at a higher level. So over the long term, the capital stock will move from K1 star to K2 star. And then output, so accordingly, the output is going to increase. And from here, so this is clearly a simple example shows, or simple theory shows, the importance of saving and the growth. The importance of saving to long-run economic growth. Right? But one thing was left silent in this theory is what determines S. Right? So when we talk about the population, we do have a micro theory that explains so what gives us N. Right? So actually, so this is going to come up in your homework 3. What determines N? So we have theory, so it's called the micro theory of family. Right? So N is essentially determined by what? Determined by parents' decision, how many kids they're going to have. Now, similarly here, so I'm going to give you a simple micro theory that explains the behavior determination of S. In some sense, this is just behavior determination of population growth or the behavior explanation. Here, this is a behavior explanation with S. Where does S come in from? Right? Okay, to understand that, so I'm going to give you a very simple inter-temporal choice model. So this is going to be a simple 2-period model. Okay, everybody lives for 2 periods. Right? So in the current period or the first period, consumer has a budget constraint. S is consumption. Sorry, C is consumption. S is saving. And then on the right-hand side is the consumer's disposable income, including Y is their wage income, T is their tax. Right? In the future period, the consumer has C prime, and S prime you can add into this equation, but S prime equal to 0 because the consumer only lives for 2 periods. Right? So there's no point for them to leave some saving behind. For now, we abstract away from altruism, or you leave away the discussion like dynasty, right? So you may have children. So we just leave that aside. Okay. So you only live for 2 periods. You only cares about your happiness or utility throughout your lifetime, which is characterized by these 2 periods. All right. And then in the second period of life, you have income, Y prime. You pay tax, T prime. And on top of that, you have saving income from first period. So just coming from here. Okay. Here I want to link to the early discussion we have when we talk about population, when we talk about social security. And in the social security, so you pay tax when you are young. You receive benefit when you are old. Right? And here, so this benefit can be interpreted as negative tax. All right, so you're going to see a question in the homework 3. Right. So now we can look at the consumer's lifetime budget constraint. Right. Essentially, we link these two together. Right. So the way we link them together is we first from this equation, you find out is as a function of these things, and substitute this is into here. Okay, that's just simple algebra. After this simple algebra, you're going to get this equation. I encourage you to do the algebra yourself, but in the class, I'm going to focus on the economic interpretation of this equation. Okay, what do we learn from this equation? Start from right-hand side. So right-hand side, there are 2 terms, basically. Let's use a parentheses. Y minus T is your disposable income in the first period. Right? And the Y prime minus T prime is your disposable income in second period. But we divide by 1 plus R. Why is that? This just reflects $1 today is different from $1 tomorrow. $1 today is the equivalent to 1 plus R dollar tomorrow. Or in other words, $1 in the future is the equivalent to 1 over, so like $1 in the future, second period, versus 1 period. So that's going to equivalent to 1 over 1 plus R dollar today. So that's reflect this discounting. Right? So hence, the right-hand side gives us the present value. So that is the concept we just learned in previous chapter. Right? So right-hand side gives us the present value of lifetime disposable income. Okay. Now we move to left-hand side. C is your consumption in first period. C prime is your consumption in second period. And similarly, so we discount by 1 over 1 plus R. So now the left-hand side is the present value of lifetime consumption. And then, so this equation just tells us your lifetime spending must equal to your lifetime income, but it's in present value terms. We write down present value. Okay, so where does present value come from? It's come from here. Right, so future is $1 worth or is equivalent to 1 over 1 plus R dollar today. Right, and here, so I have explanation. And this 1 over 1 plus R is the relative price of future consumption. Okay, so this is consumer's lifetime budget. Okay, now we do some further algebra. Okay? We define this WE as wealth. So that's at the right-hand side of the equation we have seen in the previous slide. Now we end up with the second equation. Right? And then the last algebra we are going to do is we write C prime as a function of C. The reason why we do that is so we want to put C and C prime, or put household's lifetime budget constraint in this diagram. In this diagram. So what is in this diagram? We have C, this current consumption, versus C prime, the future consumption. And then household, essentially, they are going to make a choice between how much consumed today and how much consumed tomorrow, subject to a constraint. And what is the constraint? The constraint is exactly what we just defined. Okay, this is a constraint. Now, if we put this constraint on the line, let me explain to you what that means. Oh, apology. So you put this on this diagram, right? So a few things to understand this budget constraint. So this line is the budget constraint. Okay, few things to help you understand. WE is your lifetime value of your, sorry, this is the present value of your lifetime income, WE. Right, so W actually is defined as Y minus T plus Y prime minus T prime, 1 plus R. Okay, here it says if you spend all money on current consumption, you don't care about the future. So that's all you're going to choose at this point. On the other hand, so if you postpone your consumption to future, you really cares about your future. And that's all you can spend is going to be W times 1 plus R, right? Because this is the present value. Now, if you postpone to the future, and then so you multiply 1 plus R, goes to here. And furthermore, this is the endowment point. This just says, okay, so I just consume whatever I have. So today I have Y minus T, tomorrow I have Y prime minus T prime. So this is just, I don't borrow from future and I don't save. I just eat what I have. Right? So this is 3 points. Now, lastly, so the slope of this line. The slope of this line, it just tells you the relative price of current consumption in terms of future consumption. Right? So the slope of the line, it just tells you the relative price of 2 goods you consume, either today or tomorrow. So that just gives you this budget constraint. Okay? And from your principal clause, you should realize everything above this line is infeasible, meaning you cannot afford. Everything below this line is feasible, but not efficient. Why is that? Because so you haven't used all your resource. Only along this line is efficient and feasible, right? So now, so this is the constraint the households must satisfy or must follow. Okay, but now to complete the theory of household saving, okay, to complete this theory, so what determines household saving behavior? We need to introduce household's preference. okay, what they cares about. Okay, now the last things we are going to introduce to finish the story is the household's preference, and here we call the indifference curve. What is the indifference curve? So this is a curve. Let's just take this one as example. This is a curve show you the combination of current consumption versus future consumption, like this point. This coin just tells you, okay, so this is the amount I'm going to consume for tomorrow, and this is what I'm going to consume today. And along this line, they have different combination of current and future consumption. But this indifference coming from the fact, so whether we are here, let's call A. No, so we already have A here. So whether we are here, let's call C, or we are here, D. Okay, and so you have some level of happiness. You are indifferent between C and D. All right, so this is indifference curve. Okay, so for the households, it's rational in the sense, so the households want to achieve highest level of happiness as possible as they can. And so the further away from the origin give you higher level of utility. That just means the households trying to pick a point on a indifferent curve that is away from the origin as possible as they can. But apparently the household subject constraint, otherwise there goes to infinity, right? They are going to keep moving away from the origin, right? But what's the constraint? Constraint is exactly here, right? So essentially they are going to pick, so they want to go further away as possible as they can, but as we already knew, so those are infeasible, right? But if we are goes here, and yes, it is feasible, but not efficient, right? Because you haven't used all your resource. Okay. Now the only efficient one is what is going to be characterized by here, right? So actually this slide give you the explanation. So I'm going to skip that part that tells you the results, right? So only when indifferent curve, tangent with your budget constraint, and then so you reach optimal. Okay, you reach optimal, right? But then there are two possibilities depending on where you are in terms of your consumption bundle compared with your endowment point. And if this is the case, you consume, so C less than 1 minus T prime, 1 minus T, meaning your current consumption is less than your current disposable income, meaning you save. But this immediately means you are a lender, right? So you lend to somebody else because you haven't consumed all you have, right? And so you save, you lend. So as a consequence, in the future, you can consume more than you have. Right? So this is your future consumption. This is your future disposable income. Okay. Now there are other possibilities. So you consume here more than you endow today. So how can you achieve that? Meaning you are a borrower. You borrow from your future. And in the future, you must pay back so that in the future you consume less than you will endow or you will receive. Right? So there are two cases. Right? And here I want to say, so there's an implicit assumption underneath these two pictures, which is the financial market is perfect. Okay, so you can, like here in this case, you can borrow as much as you can, and so you can borrow at the same rate as you save. Because if you go to here, this is saving rate. Because here, this is your borrowing rate. Right? But in reality, particularly in developing country, so this is not true. In developing country, number one, your borrowing rate may significantly higher than your saving rate. And secondly, so in developing country, so there may not be a credit market. So in developing country, okay, so for most of their population, they may not have a banking account. They do not have access to credit, right? So what is the implication for us? That just means, so this is not possible. All right, and now with, so in reality, so the best that they can do is probably is going to be characterized by this one. Why is that? So they are constrained by here. They cannot borrow. There's no way for them to borrow. So then they can only consume their endowment, right? And the further implication is, so without access to credit market or without well-developed financial market, so they cannot invest in their human capital. Remember, so in order to invest, they must pay some cost, right? But if there's no credit market available to them, they cannot borrow, right? They cannot do investment. So that's going to have profound impact on their economic growth and economic development, right? So actually, so in the following discussion of this chapter, we will go in depth of that aspect, right? So, okay. So just, if you don't mind, just give me 1 second, let me get some water, right? I will be back. Okay, so excuse me. All right, let's continue this graph where we are. Okay. Right, to summarize, so I just give you a simple micro theory that explain households saving decision, right? So essentially, so the households trying to smooth their consumption. To smooth their consumption so that they can achieve the highest possible level of utility, right? And so the way they achieve consumption smoothing is through saving or borrowing, right? And here the underlying assumption we have is saving and the borrowing market work perfectly. But as I just explained to you, in reality, particularly for developing countries, this is not the case. All right. Okay. So now, okay. So now we are ready to go to the detailed discussion regarding to capital and saving in developing country, right? So the first things I want to explain to you is investment and growth. Okay. Overall, investment is positively related to the growth rate of per capita GDP, right? So this is a simple implication of solo growth model, right? And then in reality, so there are papers published in AER, American Economic Review, in 1992, say they just look at the cross-country experience in terms of investment and growth, right? And then we can even look at this Harvard global model we started in the earlier part of this class to understand the importance of saving, right? So in this Harvard growth model, G is going to be equal to S, saving rate, divided by incremental capital output ratio. Okay, so you may want to review what does Harvard global model says, right? So essentially in Harvard global model, you have a constant capital output ratio, right? And this capital output ratio is going to determine the growth rate, right, plus the saving rate. So in general, so the lower the incremental capital output ratio, the smaller the saving rate will be required for sustainable growth, right? So this is the implication of this equation in terms of saving and the growth rate. Okay, so we can look at examples. So there are two countries, A and B. So they are identical initially. Okay. Per capita income 400. So this is probably like a typical developing country. Population 2.5 million. Investment ratio is 15%. So this is defined as investment divided by GDP. Okay. Notice that A is equal to I. Okay. Saving equal to investment. So that they have a incremental capital output ratio of 3.5. And then the annual growth rate turns out to be 4.3. Now, since 2000, so these two countries took a different turn. Country A becomes more capital intensive. And the country B, they become more labor intensive. Right? So in reality, this probably is going to reflect different industry policy. Also, this reflects so the different foreign investment. Right? So we will see that in the later discussion. Okay, so you have different foreign development as foreign direct investment. So that is going to have different implications on your industrial structure. Okay, so you may become more capital intensive if you have lots of foreign direct investment through high-tech sectors, or you become more labor intensive if most of the industry that has been outsourced by advanced economies. So for example, the United States outsourced this low skill sector like manufacturing, like here, like shoe manufacturing, right, to those developing countries, and that's going to make them labor intensive. Okay, so now let's see. So what is the implication for these two? Okay, so we look at country A. So they have capital intensive. Okay, and so I'm not going to go through these details, but essentially you're going to see the growth rate here or growth rate here. Okay, so now we go to country B. B is more labor intensive, right? Now you're going to see growth rate is going to be higher, right? So this model is simple enough, but tell an important story, right? So this is particularly relevant for developing countries, right? For those developing countries, if they have some capital and saving structure such that it becomes more labor intensive, so that is going to improve their economic growth, or they're going to grow faster, okay, even with lower growth rate of investment. All right. Now, to finish this part, so I want to emphasize one aspect. So allocation of investment matters. So what we have discussed in the previous slides, it just says, okay, so investment ratio, and the capital output ratio. Now, how much you invest, and whether you are capital intensive or labor intensive, that's it. But in reality, so if we go one step further, okay, you're going to find out, so how you allocate your money is going to matter, right? And so there are two examples, but they look at different aspects of allocation of investment. In the first example, so this is a paper, so student will discuss. So these three co-authors look at Chinese economic growth experience. And then what they focus on is the allocation of money between state-owned enterprise versus private enterprise, right? So these two sectors, they behave differently. Largely, they face different incentive. They have different management style. They have different constraints, right? Now, if the resource allocation changes or move from one to the other, so that's going to change the return of capital. And then eventually that leads to a different rate of growth for the economy, right? So this is one paper. The other paper, they look at the investment in different type of capital, whether it's equipment, okay, versus if they invest in like non-durables, right? And then they find out, so that's going to have different implication in terms of growth rate, right? So that's slightly different from the angle the first paper I look at, right? The first paper is look at sectors. The second paper look at type of capital or type of investment, right? But overall, so this is the make a point, how we allocate investment matters, okay? Okay. Now here we can see the saving rate, okay, for different countries. But here this is household saving rate. Okay. So this is United States. This is well known. So Americans save very little, right? So before financial crisis, their saving rate, household saving rate is close to zero, right? And certainly, so this saving rate difference matters to the growth rate. Just remind yourself the growth accounting exercise, growth accounting we discussed earlier. Right, so here the saving matters. Okay, and here, so if you go into the details in this graph, sorry, in this table, right, and you're going to see two things. Number one, there's wide range of difference in terms of saving rate across country. Okay, so look at this dimension. The other things, if you look carefully, so over time, this is a very interesting time period, right? Between 2008 and 2009, there is a global financial crisis. Okay, if you look at over time, you're going to see in most of the country the saving rate increase slightly. Okay, what explains that? So largely because of the uncertainty, and households was worried about uncertainty in the economy. They consume less, and they save more. Right. So this is what you should observe by looking at this table. Okay. Now, if we look further into the saving behavior, okay, if you look at United States, but we separate the saving into three groups. Corporate, this is corporate like business saving, and this is personal saving, and this government. Okay, let's write down this is government, and here so this is consumer or personal. The oh sorry, so the green line is consumer. The gray line is business. Okay, so from here you can see the decline in aggregate saving or net saving, and the low level of saving in the US economy was largely caused by the government's behavior. That is, the government runs large deficit, borrows more, right? Particularly the government borrows or run large deficit during the war and during a financial crisis. Now in 2020 pandemic, so this even worse than here and close to this level. All right, so this is for United States. Okay. Right, so if we look at household saving rate across country, and you see a divergence. So this is on top of this China and India. So this is a typical phenomenon in developing country, right? So they save more, right? And then so here this is United States, this is US, this is advanced OECD country. So essentially a group of rich countries. Right? It is declining and the level is very low. Right? So you can see the divergence. You may want to compare this background with their growth rate experience in the same time period. Right? So that's going to be a useful comparison. Okay? So I'm going to skip this large table. Right. Wait, what is this household consumption? Probably going to skip this one. Now we move to the second section of this chapter. So we're going to talk about source of saving. Right. So we have seen the net national saving is, okay, and then so we are going to characterize them into different groups, and hopefully, so we are going to have a better understanding what explain the saving rate difference across country, and what explain the saving rate change over time. So that's what we are going to, that's what we're going to do in the following slides, right? So start with ACE. This is a saving. And then, so first we are going to divide this into SD, which is domestic saving, and SF, which is foreign saving. So in terms of domestic saving, and then so you have ASG, which is a government saving, and ASP, which is private saving. Okay, but then so in terms of government saving, so you have government ASGB, which is budgetary saving. Now, so essentially is essentially equal to government revenue minus government expenditure. Right, so this is fiscal surplus or fiscal deficit. And you also have government enterprise saving. Think about in the United States, think about Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. Okay, so this is government saving. Now, if we have private, so you have private corporate saving. So here, private, you have SPC corporate and ASP. Let's call. Let me see what do we call that. So SPH, SPH, households. So that's regarding to domestic. Right, so this part is domestic. Now let's look at foreign. Okay, foreign, you have foreign official saving and foreign private saving. Okay, foreign official, foreign private. So what's the foreign official? Think about the government, like foreign government invest in domestic economy. What is foreign private? Think about foreign private sector, like a company. Think about Coca-Cola, invest in Vietnam. Nike invest in Thailand. So that's foreign private. But foreign private, we have foreign private borrowing, like a debt, versus foreign private equity. Okay, so let's go back here, and we have finished the discussion. This, let me just make a few change. Okay. Okay. What happened? I don't know what happened with my. It doesn't work. Okay. Oh, wait a second. All right. So I don't know what happens. So to summarize, we have total saving. Wait, what's going on? Okay, so I guess it's good. So summarize, we have total saving, right? And this is domestic, and this is foreign, right? And in terms of domestic, so this is foreign from outside. In terms of domestic, so we have government versus private. Okay, and in terms of foreign, so you have official, that is from the government or agency, right? And then so you have private. So, but private, you can either through debt financing or through equity financing. So what's the difference? So debt financing essentially it just lend money to you, okay, with some string attached, either just interest rate or other requirement, right? But what is equity? Equity is just, okay, so I'm going to invest and we have a joint venture, okay, through like stocks. There's like shareholder agreement, right? So that just gives you the total saving. But for each term, it can be positive or negative. Right? Positive means so money, this is like inflow. If it is positive, capital inflow. If it is negative, then so we observe outflow, meaning the money will flow to outside of the country. Right? So this is how we characterize. And the reason why we characterize them into so many subgroups is because they have different costs. They have, I mean, in terms of the change, right? So they have different costs. And in terms of their policy implications, so they have very different implications, right? So when I say implication, essentially implication on growth and development. Okay.
Professor, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Can you explain how the foreign numbers could be negative? Wouldn't those always be positive?
All right. So let's say, okay, so let's just say use this as example. If if foreign direct investment is positive, let's just say, for example, we talk about Mexico. And let's just presume, so there's only one country outside of Mexico, which is the United States. And now we are looking at Mexico. If we observe this number is negative for Mexico, meaning so Mexican actually they purchase stocks in US. Okay, so Mexican they invest in American company. If it is positive, as you said, that means American spend money in Mexico. Right? So they offer money, they invest in Mexico company. So this money they invest in Mexico is going to help Mexican company. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And I can even just further just give you another example. If let's look at debt financing. So if the external commercial borrowing debt financing is positive, and typically how that happens is, so American company, they want to sell their machines to Mexican. Right, so you may think about Boeing. Okay, so this is an example. So there's a Boeing may lend Mexican 1 billion so that Mexican can buy Boeing 787. This 1 billion is going to show up as a positive SFPD for Mexican. So it may essentially, so they borrow, right? But then, so it can be negative, meaning, so instead of Mexican borrow from American, and then the American borrow from Mexican, so that Mexican can export avocado to the United States. Okay, it can be both positive and negative. But depending on how you interpret it, the flow. Okay, so maybe you reverse. Maybe you say, okay, so negative is the inflow and the positive is outflow, depending on how you interpret it. But here my point is, it can be positive and it can be negative. It just gives you different different direction in terms of capital flow. Okay. So let's keep this. Yeah. So here just show you foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment is real and is quite significant, right? And so here, so the biggest receiver is probably China. Is bigger than any other single country, right? The unit is US dollar. It looks very big, but however, if you divide by their GDP, or in other words, if you look at percentage, okay, and then so you're gonna have different picture, right? Other things I want to emphasize, this is foreign direct investment. So this is very different from foreign aid, okay, as we are going to see later. Foreign aid is different from foreign direct investment. Foreign aid is money flow into the country with no financial return. Okay? Maybe there are other strings attached. Say, for example, they may require you to have some regime change or have some reforms, or may want you to improve your human right, so on and so forth, right? But foreign direct investment has less requirement on that front. So foreign direct investment is more for like business or a commercial purpose. Just keep that in mind, right? So the point of this slide just show you, so there's a significant capital inflow and outflow happens. And here, so by the way, so this inflow and outflow happens both in developing country, right? So like US, like China. Okay, so but the next is, so these days people may not agree. So should we label China as developing country or not? Okay, but also you can see there is a significant foreign direct investment in very advanced economy, like Germany, okay, or certain region like Hong Kong. Just keep in mind, Hong Kong, so the population is 7 million. And in China, so the population is 1.4 billion. But look at foreign direct investment, then you should look at here. So the total number in China is less than 3 times compared to Hong Kong. But look at the population. All right, so just keep that in mind in terms of understand the big picture. No.
Hey, Professor.
Yes.
Hey, quick question. For that China number in 2010, what happened from 2019 to 2010 where China's direct investment like almost doubled?
I don't have good answer. It seems like a little bit counterintuitive. Oh, my guess is in 29. So there was like global financial crisis. So China, so they have the massive stimulus plan. So their economy seems like a rebound fairly quick. And then so the capital was trying to find a good place to invest. That probably expand the inflow of capital or increase in foreign direct investment in between 29 and 2010.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. So, but if we look at 2019 and 2020, so you are going to see the decline. So this decline both because of international political climate and because of their domestic issue. Right. If in terms of international, so I guess let's see. I mean, this probably linked with their domestic issue, right? So, because this foreign direct investment, if we just speaking of China or speaking of developing country, so most of this money or this investment, most of them coming from OECD country or developed country, right? And so in recently, 2019 or 2020, you know, China's in terms of their foreign policy and in terms of their domestic issue are not quite in line with international society. And that may discourage those foreign direct investment net flow. Right. So we may get there later, right? So let's just finish this the big picture. But thanks for your questions. Yeah. Right. So now we move to the third part. So we look at the determinants of private saving. Just remind yourself, so we look at saving, okay? Saving includes domestic versus foreign. And in terms of domestic, we have government versus private, right? And the foreign, we have official versus private, but private, we have debt versus equity. Okay, so we are going to pick some of them, so because there are so many categories, we pick those most important to explain one by one. So first, we are going to look at households or private saving. Oh, by the way, here private, you have corporate and households. Okay, so we are going to first look at household saving. Yeah. So in terms of household saving, there are three stylized facts. Number one, high-income households tend to save larger fraction of their income. Over time, household saving ratio tends to be constant, particularly in industrial country, meaning rich country. Right? Three, across countries, saving rate are not related to income. Okay? So inside one country, saving rate is related to income, but across countries, saving rate are not related to income. And then, so in history, so we have many economists has been puzzled by this stylized fact. They have tried to advocate different theory to justify those stylized facts. So here, I'm going to show you three renowned models. The first model is Keynesian absolute income hypothesis. So this is something you have learned in your principal class. Actually, in my principal class, we just discussed this equation today. Okay, but it's a slightly different version. What this is, saving is going to be a linear function of your income. And so the ratio is essentially is marginal propensity to save. They just says if you have $1 additional disposable income, how much I'm going to save. In this example, you have 23, just says $1 I earned, I will save 30 cents. That just means I'm going to spend 70 cents. And what is A? A is a constant. This constant is going to reflect the amount that you must spend as minimum, right? How to understand that? So, for example, you have, look at this equation. If you have a disposable income of 0, you make $0. You must save A. And typically, this A is negative, meaning you must borrow. You borrow some so that even though you have 0 income, you still need to, you still can, if this is negative A, or sorry, if this is A, if this is like a negative number, and you still can consume because you now with this borrowing, you can still consume negative A amount, not become positive. Right? So this just reflects the fact you need to spend certain amount as a minimum survival. Sorry, as you need to spend minimum amount to survive. Right. Now let's look at this example to understand this equation. So if A equal to negative 100, S equal to 0.3, that just means if you have disposable income of 1,000, your savings becomes 200. Right. So now, given this, you're going to see a average private saving rate of 20%. Once your income increases to 2,000, okay, and then the saving rate will increase to 25%, right? And so the nice things about the theory is, so the equation is linear, is simple, and plus, so you can generate increase in saving rate, but this aggregate saving rate, right? But somehow this is against with, let's go back here. So we look at three stylized facts. So the theory I just explained to you, it seems like this is against the three, right? Because the three says across country saving rate are not related to income. But I just show you some higher income and higher average saving rate, right? And so even worse, okay? So it doesn't satisfy one, because one says higher income household tends to save larger fraction of their income, right? But wait a second, sorry. But here, so yeah, so depending on how you interpret this. So here, your marginal saving incentive is the same regardless of your income, but your average saving rate may increase with your income. Okay, but overall, this is a simple hypothesis, but it did not explain very well the three facts we discussed or we just showed. Okay, so now let's look at, right, so here, so this average private saving rate increase as income. So this may be true in short run, but not true in long run. Okay, so now we go to the second theory. This is called relative income hypothesis. And this income hypothesis hopefully can generate increase in saving rate as your income increase. Okay? So this theory was invented by James Dusenberry. And so here, so he introduced a term in the last, right? So in the previous one, this is the same, right? So essentially your consumption is going to be a constant fraction of your income. But this just naturally, if you rewrite this as saving, this means saving is a constant fraction of your income. Here, just consumption is a constant fraction of your income, right? So now he adds this term. This term just says your consumption is going to, depending on your previous consumption level, what is highest consumption level, right? So if previously, if you have highest consumption level, and then your current consumption cannot below that, and this they have a name, it's called ratchet effect. So it's a one way. So your consumption must keep increasing, not decreasing, right? So this is relative income. But unfortunately, this is going to generate declining in and depending on how your income change, right, over time. So this may generate decline in saving rate once your income increase. Okay, the last theory was proposed by Milton Friedman, who is considered the greatest economist in 20th century. And he believes saving is going to be depending on the nature of the income. So whether your income is a permanent change or permanent income, or is a transitory income. What that means? So what is a permanent income change? Give an example. In the summer, I was promoted as an associate professor. My income increased by a couple of thousand. So this couple of thousand is a permanent in the sense, so my income is going to increase from the summer till my retirement. So this is permanent change. Now this is permanent income. Okay, what is transitory income? Again, in the summer, I receive a check from the government, right? So because we have 2 kids, then the total check we receive is 34, if I remember correctly. We have 3,400 or 3,400, right? But this is a one-time. This is a one-time, right? So I cannot expect these things are going to happen every year, right? So now, how would that affect household saving behavior? So the permanent income, okay, for the permanent income change, so I may save very little because I know, so I'm going to keep receiving a bigger check, right? So and then so I won't save much for that change. But for this one times, this is going to happen only one time. I won't spend all of these 3,400. Okay? Or in other words, in general, so B1 is less than B2. And B1 is close to 0 and B1 close to 1. Right? So this is another hypothesis that explains households' saving behavior. Okay? The last one is called clause theory, Cardo. So Cardo is a famous economist, so who document the famous Cardo's facts. He documents some facts regarding to economic growth. Okay, and in his theory, he said saving behavior is going to depend on which class are you. Are you a worker or are you a capitalist? That you have a lot of capital income. And then your saving behavior or your saving propensity or your saving rate is going to differ, right? So this theory can explain fact 1 and 3, okay? But they may not able to justify or don't have a good theory why you have different saving rate, right? So I'm going to stop here today, and then the next class we'll pick up from here. We look at corporate saving. All right. Thank you so much for your attention, and see you on Monday. Okay.